It was a real opportunity given the complexity of the digital supply chains, because where there is a supply chain and where there is complexity, there is waste. Where there is waste, there is probably going to be a negative impact to the environment. When we started thinking about the reduction opportunities within the ad tech ecosystem and the ways that those reduction opportunities could also provide economic value, not just efficiencies, but actually a better, more effective ecosystem, it was honestly a no-brainer.
Hey folks, I'm Conor Gaughan, and welcome to Consensus in Conversation, a podcast where we're talking to the innovators, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who are committed to building successful businesses that also help us build a better world. We've been talking a lot about hidden economies on the show, those industries and products that seem so fundamental to our world that we overlook them on a day-to-day basis, but they hold massive impact potential in terms of both sustainability and profit for new innovations because they're so ubiquitous. Now, the concept usually applies to physical infrastructure that we take for granted: cement, steel, waste management, things like that. But I think it can actually go further. These days, most of us spend as much, if not more, maybe even too much time in the digital world. And that world has infrastructure too. There are a ton of behind-the-scenes processes that shape how we experience the internet. And just like most of the time we don't think about the concrete and the sidewalk under our feet, we also generally don't think much about the digital architecture of our online world. Take, for instance, advertising. By now, ads on the internet are just a fact of life that we're all used to. Sometimes maybe they're useful, sometimes a pain, but mostly just there, part of the scenery. You probably don't think about them too much until they interrupt your YouTube video. Of course, for those of us in the digital media space, online ads form a part of our livelihood, so we do think about them sometimes. But still, when we think about them, we think about content. We think about the product they're selling, the quality of their copy, their look, where we might place them. I don't think we give too much thought to things like the coding mechanisms that determine which ads are displayed where and to whom, or even more importantly, what those ads are actually made of and where they exist. This is an important but easily overlooked thing about the digital world. Everything in it exists somewhere. The internet is not magic. Its constituent parts are real things that have corporeal form, and not just the network hardware. Even the code that tells the hardware what to do has a physical form. That form is very, very small and very abstract, configurations of electrons in a magnetic medium within a hard drive, but it's ultimately still made of matter, and that means that creating and maintaining it has an impact on the physical world in the form of a carbon footprint. Now, I have to admit, when I first read about our guest's mission to decarbonize digital advertising, my initial thought was, how much of a carbon footprint can online ads really have? It's easy to conceptualize how traditional advertising generates a carbon footprint. You need to cut down trees to make paper for print ads. Sets and costumes and diesel generators to run the lights on a commercial shoot take energy. Even the food waste from those never-eaten breakfast spreads at pitch meetings. All that has a carbon footprint. But with digital advertising, it's much harder to see. But it's there in that hidden physical form that the data takes. Think about how many thousands, millions, billions of ads there are online. Think about all the code that's required to determine instantaneously which of the infinite array of ads each of us individually gets served on each of the sites that we visit. All that data, all that code has to be stored on hard drives and servers. And those server racks require energy to operate. And until our energy systems are 100% renewable, the generation of that energy comes with carbon emissions. In fact, a substantial amount. A recent report estimates that digital advertising accounts for up to 7.2 million tons of CO2 a year, the equivalent of providing power for 1.5 million American homes. That report was generated by Scope3, a public benefit corporation dedicated to decarbonizing media and advertising. And I'm very excited to have its co-founder and COO, Anne Coghlan, joining us on the show today to help make sense of these numbers and what a sustainable future for digital advertising might look like. When it comes to breaking down numbers, Anne is exactly who you need. She's got her master's degree in the philosophy of mathematics, and in her previous work at AppNexus, she helped develop a lot of the technology that underpins digital advertising delivery today. A vital voice for sustainability in media, Anne's work has been recognized across the ad industry, including Ad Age's 40 Under 40 and Ad Exchanger's Top Women in Media and Ad Tech. It was such a pleasure to have Anne join the conversation. So without further ado, let's jump in. Thanks for joining today. How you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I am good. It's a rainy day here in DC, hence very productive. So I'll take it. I wanted to start learning a little bit about you. And so curious if you can just give us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally?
I am from London in the UK, born and bred. My family is a mix of the very north of England, so practically Scottish, 1 mile away from Scotland, and Irish, so the Republic of Ireland. So that's kind of my background. But yeah, have pretty much almost all my life lived in London, except for, a couple of years here and there studying in other places.
And I know you've got a couple themes that seem to run through your life and education, two of which I want to get your kind of connection between, which are math and music.
Yes.
I'm curious if you would kind of talk to us about what you see as the connection between those two, and maybe what you see as how they've been a part of who you've become.
Yeah, I think there's a huge connection with patterns in maths and music, especially when you're learning maths. And I've got a 4-year-old and he's learning all the patterns about how numbers work together and add together. And really music is a very beautiful thing that we don't think about, all the patterns within how you compose a piece of music and how that then translates into the world. So I think that's like a real connection. And for me, I loved the problem solving aspect of maths from a very young age. And with music, I probably loved the problem solving aspect of trying to play in tune a lot less when I was learning violin. And I think definitely my neighbours and my parents also loved that part slightly less. But, I think there's a real joy to like cracking something and working out a way of playing something better or solving a problem better that I, loved as I grew up. And I really pursued maths as the academic area that I love the most. And then music is the hobby that was a huge part of my life growing up into, even now.
What sparked the passion for music? Do you remember the start of that?
Yes, I have quite a musical family. My mum actually would go into prisons in London and would run the choir.
Oh, wow.
As like a side gig. And so she played guitar, couldn't read music, but was very musical, or still is very musical, sings and does that kind of vocational aspect of music. My dad was obsessed with opera. I did not get taught rock music or anything cool in the eyes of my peers. It was always classical music. It was always, a little bit of Beethoven here and an aria from my dad's favorite Italian composer, opera, on the other side. I think the other thing that I kind of got from my parents is that music is very much something that you don't experience alone, and you learn how you have to play instruments together.
Yeah.
The collaboration, sitting next to your desk partner in the orchestra and knowing the areas only one of you could play a certain part of it. And it was like a secret between yourselves, and it was trying to improve each other, trying to learn, share, how you could actually make this whole piece of music come together and be something real was like really powerful for me, knowing that maybe I wasn't perfect at playing my part, but wow, the audience really could understand and feel the music and the performance that we were creating as a group of young musicians.
And the power of the collective performance.
Exactly.
So then flipping back to math, it became your academic passion for quite a while. Tell us about kind of the study of math and how, it's just such a, I think for most people, it's the idea of math is it ends like somewhere around geometry, right? Between geometry and calculus, like you're done. But there's such a value and, there's such theory and such beauty as it gets more and more advanced. So I'm curious for your take on kind of the beauty of math.
It's a great question. And I have so many books behind me on exactly that topic, the beauty of maths, the beauty of finding proofs to theorems. In the UK, you don't have like a major and a minor. You just go all in. So my degree was in maths from day one. I had 100% of my lectures and my courses. And the areas that I was really drawn to were areas of theory around the evolution of mathematical thinking. So I think actually one of my favorite courses was on the history and development of mathematical analysis, which is a huge, goes towards calculus, right? The development of that. What does that look like? And what was really powerful was how theorems were put out there and ideas were put out there and then taken and developed. And that was a really interesting and fun way of deeply learning and understanding what I'd actually revised and done in my first year courses, because you could understand the actual people behind the theorems and the proofs and everything that was going on throughout history. So I found that really powerful. And then I loved the study of logic. And it's quite interesting because the beauty of logic is that it connects actually maths and philosophy.
Yeah.
Plato had on top of his academy, anyone ignorant of maths should stop here. Back in the day, everything was all combined and there wasn't really this very rigid, you study these subjects and nothing connects. So I love this kind of connection of the dots. And when it came to logic, what I also really loved was proving all these complex truths and falsities and thinking through how that works and how that actually translates into real life. So there's a group of people called the intuitionists. And if you think about very simple logic, if it's not true, it's false. And if it's not false, it's true, right? If you play any kind of logic games or just generally in life, that's how we roll.
Right.
The intuitionists believe that if it wasn't true, it was false. But if it wasn't false, it was in this middle ground and you couldn't assert that something was true. And for me, that was kind of mind-blowing and really, really cool, because I actually think that we as humans in real life are like that, right? It's show me something's true, show me something's false. If it's not false, you need to do some more stuff here, right? So, I think there's lots of different threads in the way that I think about what we need to do as a product organization, as a company with a very strong mission that ties to the collaboration music, making sure that we're all kind of learning together this kind of truth and falsity and kind of burden of proof on how we're living. And then all of the connecting the dots and starting from first principles in the maths world. Yeah,
I feel like we're going to have a long conversation about this coming up in a second. But around this time, did you know what you wanted to do in life? What were your thoughts or plans on a career coming out studying math? What was the vision that you had?
I had no idea. Again, maybe it's just the truth and falsity. I knew what I did not want to do.
Right.
So I did not want to go into investment banking, which was what a lot of my peers went into doing, because I felt like there was less of a purpose I could tie back to my life.
Yeah.
And I knew that I did not want to be a school teacher, because both my parents were school teachers and they both told me not to be a secondary school teacher or a high school teacher. So actually, I did a postgraduate degree in philosophy, where I fully studied logic, proofs, theories. My dissertation was on the difference between proof and calculation in the world of Ludwig Wittgenstein. Please don't ask me in detail about the thesis, because I think I've mentally blanked out some of it, but it was super interesting. And I took that year to think a little bit more about what I actually wanted to do. And I joined the world of consulting. So I joined Accenture on their graduate program to understand a little bit more about the world of business. Given that my parents were both school teachers, a lot of my family have, work in professions like nursing. I have an uncle who, until he retired, was a shepherd. I didn't have very much exposure to the world of business. I didn't really know what jobs were out there for someone like me. And so joined consulting to figure out where I should go next.
So, when you think about these worlds, the confluence of the worlds of logic and philosophy and proofs, do you think deep down that you believe that every problem out there is solvable, that there's an equation that gets us to a solution? Or today, when you think about problem solving, when you think about solutions, whether they're, the idea of resource allocation for fixing climate issues or anything else, is math at the core of your own personal logic and problem solving?
I would say the use of reasoning definitely is. But, I think if we could take every problem, translate it into a mathematical equation and come up with the perfect answer, we wouldn't have very many jobs. It would be kind of be job done. So, no, I think there is a definite need for experimentation. That was the third part of my thesis: experimentation, calculation versus proof. There's definite need for the experiments to happen, to try things out, to kind of get towards maybe more like that mathematical perfect ideal. But I'm very much a pragmatic, realistic person that, no, I don't sit here and think, okay, I have this product problem. I just need to find the right combination of things and it will be perfect. There are really clear need for those human moments of insight and moments of discussion and collaboration where you can find out things that you just hadn't considered at all before.
As you think back to that year, what became the bridge, or what got you to bridge the gap between abstract philosophy, math, applied math, and like the problem-solving world of technology and business? Like, how did you kind of network across all of that to begin your career as a consultant?
I did a lot of jobs while I was studying. I worked in a bar. I gave out flyers at sporting events. I worked in a music shop. I worked in the HR department of GlaxoSmithKline. I translated a book on data mining, and I'm sure there are more random jobs that I did, but I think there was that kind of like that practicality of how to work with people as well outside of the realm of music and group projects. And then I think I probably applied the studious person's mindset, like learn, be really curious, ask questions, recognize who seems to know what they're doing and ask to work on the project with them, take best practices, build them into kind of my own mental model of what it means to work well and effectively in a given situation. And so there was also on the project that I was assigned to initially a great mix of kind of logical things that needed to be done to actually make a project go through to the end, as well as lots of technical problems and challenges that I think the brain of trying to work through complex theorems and proofs was helpful to prepare me for that.
Yeah. And then your next experience was at AppNexus, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
exactly.
then, and I think this really does kind of set the stage. It's fundamental to what you're doing at Scope3, not just because it's, I think, where you met your co-founder, Brian O'Kelly, but, I read you joke that in your work there, you, quote, created a lot of complexities that we live with to this day, end quote. And so can you elaborate on what you meant by that and kind of give us a bit of the story of AppNexus and how the work you're doing now kind of is still reverberating from AppNexus?
Yeah. So I think joining AppNexus was probably the first calculated career choice decision that I made. At the point of choosing to move to AppNexus, I knew that what got me excited about work was collaboration with really smart people who also enjoyed problem solving and bashing heads together to figure out the best way forward.
Yeah.
And then maybe a month later, deciding that the best way forward was a slightly different way and going in that direction. I knew that I liked working somewhere that moved pretty quickly. And I wanted to go into an industry that seemed really complex, but that I really knew nothing about. So I wanted the challenge of thinking and seeing something new. So why not join an ad tech company where the founder, Brian, who's my co-founder now at Scope3, invented a lot of the technology that is still used in actually how the ad tech ecosystem works and operates. It just seemed like a kind of a cool place to be.
Sure.
In 2014 when I joined it.
And then AppNexus gets bought and you move on to Waybridge in supply chain technology next.
Yeah.
So as we get to now Scope3, how did the experiences at AppNexus and Waybridge combine to help formulate your vision for Scope3 and what led you to take the leap into starting it?
So I stayed at AppNexus for about a year after it was acquired. It became Xando, it was bought by AT&T, and AppNexus is now part of Microsoft. I think the move to Waybridge was a combination of the similar three decision-making factors. One, I wanted to work with really smart people, and having worked with Brian, I say to people when they ask me in interview, why do you still work with Brian after many years? And I say, well, I often learn more about myself or about a problem in an hour with Brian than I did in 3 weeks working on a project with someone else. So I really wanted that. I think, honestly, after 5.5 years of working in ad tech, I wanted a break because I thought, how can I continue to evolve, learn a whole new problem space, and how do I create value for customers by working out what the problems are that needs to be solved. And, the physical supply chain space was actually something I'd never done in my career. Because while I was working in telecommunications, the products I was designing and the testing that I was doing, it was all very much in the digital realm.
Yeah, sure.
It felt cool to think about doing something where I could explain it to my parents.
Yeah. And then as those two things combine, what got you to the vision of Scope3? How did that become born?
It's really fascinating that when thinking through the ad serving process at AppNexus, so, when a user goes onto a website and the page loads and there is an ad call and so much decision-making happens to decide which ad gets shown to me compared to which ad gets shown to you based on a myriad of different variables. It's fascinating to me that I never thought about that as a supply chain.
Oh, interesting.
And I think the reason for that was because it happens so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the other reason is that we didn't really need to think of it as a supply chain at that point in time. Because while, you get delivery issues and problems like that, it's only when you kind of back out of the physical world into the digital world that you realize, okay, well, there's a supply chain in the physical world and, a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal. Remember that during COVID? There was no freight on that specific ship that our customers were complaining about, but there was a big backlog. There were huge shipping issues. That physical problem of that really slow but visible supply chain, something I just never backed out into the digital world before. And then I think the other element was this idea of improving the ecosystem of the physical supply chain. And our customers were buying and selling raw materials, specifically metals at that point in time. So they were taking metal, buying it from Chile, shipping it to Florida, transporting it on trucks to Georgia, and then turning it into copper wire.
Yeah.
And what I really found fascinating there was trying to improve that ecosystem, trying to improve the ad tech ecosystem were actually very similar. We were looking for efficiencies.
Yep.
We were looking for ways to save time of the people that were pressing all the buttons, whether they were, buttons in a DSP in the ad tech world, whether that was advanced algorithms or whether it was stopping the person in the office having to stop faxing things and writing numbers down manually on a piece of paper. So it's this efficiency parallel. So when we started thinking about the sustainability side of the physical supply chain world and tried to map that then back into the ad tech world, because Brian and I, we were out of ad tech, but it was still really interesting to be external observers on what was happening in ad tech. The cookie was still dying. There was lots of interesting, developments in antitrust cases and things like that. So we would still kind of flip back and forth, like the fun side conversations about ad tech and the day-to-day meat of problem solving for these customers, and realized that there was a real opportunity given the complexity of the digital supply chains and the sustainability problem that therefore existed, because where there is a supply chain and where there is complexity, there is waste. Where there is waste in this world, there is probably going to be a negative impact to the environment. And in the case of the ad tech ecosystem, a lot of that is servers and server farms doing all the complex computations.
Right.
And those servers are not going to be powered by green energy in most cases.
Was the orientation from before day one, we've got a climate problem that we want to solve, and the place we know how to solve it is digital media. And the solution is thinking about the supply chain on the data side of ad technology? Or was it, there's better ways to do ad technology that are more efficient and they have, positive externality of also helping on potentially the climate? Or was it all of the above? Was it a bit of a triangulation?
It was actually the first one.
Okay.
So thinking about everything through a sustainability lens, we're trying to put into our metals platform the idea of like the carbon emissions of the shipping, whether you would go by rail or by truck. There seemed quite, limited options there.
Right, a simpler calculation almost.
When we started thinking about the reduction opportunities within the ad tech ecosystem and the ways that those reduction opportunities could also provide economic value and also potentially provide not just efficiencies, but actually a better, more effective ecosystem for what the ad ecosystem should be like. It was honestly a no-brainer. I think you said we would get on to like, what was the decision made to found the company? I don't think we ever actually discussed. It was never like a big sit down of like, should we do this? It was like, okay, so we're doing this and who should set up Slack and which cloud providers should we choose? Because we have to be very mindful, even ourselves, of the technology that we're going to use to start the company. That was the conversation. It wasn't is this the right thing? And obviously we spoke with some potential customers before we took the leap.
Did you ever see yourself as a founder? Like, is this something that you always wanted to do? Or was this something that in retrospect, like, wow, I'm a little surprised I just did that?
I think in the kind of problem solving and connecting the dots, wherever I've worked and whatever project I've been on, there's always been that, I see a problem and no one else seems to be fixing that problem. So I'm going to fix it myself. I worked in a music shop and like it was a mess behind at the back. The number of like guitar cables and finding anything was a nightmare. And I just said, look, can I come in on a Sunday when it's shut? Give me £200, I'll buy furniture. Like from that perspective of like seeing a problem and solving it all through my career. I never thought my goal in life is to found a company and that will make me happy. But I think that actually that means that I'm not really focused on myself as a founder and what that means. I'm very much focused on how do we solve the problem? How do we stay true to the mission that we've defined? How do we build a great organization where we nurture people's careers and talent and help them be aligned to the mission? And so it's, I guess, less about me and more about what we're doing.
Yeah. I want to come back to the industry in a second, but before I do that, I think now's actually the perfect time to just give us like the elevator pitch for what Scope3 is and does, and then we can kind of help connect the dots a little bit more.
So I'll start with the mission because it's really core to what we do. So our mission is to decarbonize media and advertising. Over the last 2.5 years, we've built a very granular emissions model that helps all businesses within the ecosystem understand where emissions are coming from, and then provides tools and levers to help them to understand the scale of the problem and ultimately reduce their emissions. And what's great about the complexity of the ecosystem is that can create a systemic flywheel of reduction. So, if one publisher reduces their emissions, everyone buying has a lower footprint overall,
right?
Because we're all connected in this chain. The other aspect, which we kind of touched on, is that what we see at Scope3 is that by focusing on emissions, by bringing sustainability more centrally to what a brand is thinking about when it comes to their performance and their own business outcomes, you start to see positive results in other areas as well. So you start to see waste reduction, you start to see not buying things that you actually shouldn't or wouldn't want to be buying anyway because it's inefficient, it's ineffective, it's potentially fraudulent, not good for the existence of the internet, for advertising, things like buying ad placements that no one will ever see, that reload every 10 seconds, all the annoying stuff, essentially. So we see that as well. That's really, really powerful about the data that we've created.
And I think folks are starting to get a better sense as there's the increasing demand of data centers and computing powers on the rise. People are more aware of what it actually means, or are able to kind of understand how their digital usage comes with climate impact. But can you give us a sense at the grand level, like what this looks like? As you think about the entire media and advertising sector and think about the potential for efficiency and for waste reduction and for emissions reduction, what is the kind of the big picture here that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I'll give you 3 stats. The first one is that in December, in our end of year state of advertising report, we calculated that there are 7.8 million metric tons of carbon emitted just from web and streaming advertising in 5 major countries. And that is equivalent to powering over 5 million homes in Germany for the year. So pretty big. The second stat is that you're absolutely right. While between 2007 and 2021, electricity demand in the US was relatively flat. A New York Times article came out a couple of weeks ago, showed that the projected demand for electricity is going to go up because of the increased demand for data centers, for things like AI, but also the ad tech ecosystem is going to be using that AI.
Yeah.
And we just see the demand increase overall. And thirdly, and this again, I did a presentation in Germany last week, which is why these are all slightly German stats off the top of my head. But if everyone in Germany decided to cut what we call climate risk inventory, which is inventory that I described previously, but really high emissions inventory, made for advertising inventory, the overall emissions generated by Germany would reduce by 60% if we just cut the bad stuff out. So while it's really bad, while it could easily get worse, there are tangible ways that significant areas of the advertising ecosystem could see valuable reduction. And that leads to servers being turned off. Okay, fine, maybe repurposed, but absolutely this reduction can happen for companies at scale.
First of all, I love this phrase. Is it climate risk inventory?
Yeah.
I love that. And presumably it comes with a cost savings for the advertisers who are no longer buying useless inventory that they shouldn't need to buy or shouldn't want to buy anyway, right?
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
In practice, what we see as we work with brands is that they actually just reinvest that money into better inventory.
Sure.
And that's actually really important if we think about what we want the ecosystem to look like in the future. Because if you're a brand and let's say you've got a £10,000 campaign running and you decide to cut the climate risk stuff, maybe £1,000 that you were spending on stuff that was just bad, wasteful, you couldn't quite tell because the performance metrics are gamed for that stuff, but the emissions is really clear. You reinvest that £1,000 into low emissions media, which actually correlates, it's not perfect, with legitimate journalistic content, places where people actually consume information and content that they want to watch of an evening and all of that stuff. We're actually strengthening the areas of the internet that personally, as a human and as a consumer, I would like to see continue. So I think the cost savings play is nice, but I actually prefer the spend shift paradigm where we actually see money being invested in places that is better for the planet overall and better for society as a whole. That's maybe a little lofty, but I think it's actually realistic.
Yeah. And I mean, the natural question to link us back to your history is, I'm just kind of curious how understanding the industry and understanding the problems of the sector and modeling the solutions you guys have, like how has that tied back to your study of math?
That's a great question. I think it's definitely helped a lot when we lay out our thesis. Okay, this is what we want to prove. This is our hypothesis, which is what we did in October 2022, we went to the World Federation of Advertisers, and Brian and I spoke to them about our thesis, which was, as a brand, by reducing emissions and by focusing on sustainability, you will see at least flat performance. Like, you may as well do it. But actually, we think that you'll see improved performance. So from a mathematical perspective and a logic perspective, laying out the thesis, kind of going back to first principles, and then working out like how we actually create and make sure that we have all of the data in place, that means that we can be on the way to the proof of that, has been pretty powerful. I have not integrated or differentiated any equations while I've been at Scope3, but definitely kind of that open mentality of connecting the dots. The framework, absolutely. Great word,
And you talk about, your perspective as someone who comes in as a problem solver. I think, Scope3 is a public benefit corporation. And I think that process is analogous to going behind the desk at the music store and trying to organize a bunch of guitar chords into a way that they're findable and usable. So talk to us about why that was the route that you guys chose, and the advantages it brings, but also just how you thought about it, how you executed it. Because I know it is a lot of steps and a lot of thinking to get through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the public benefit corporation is how we actually found the company. What it means is that our mission statement and what we hold as core to us is ingrained in the company's charter. It's not exactly like this, but the way I like to think about it is that the environment has a seat on our board.
Yeah.
And so if, tomorrow we change direction and said, we actually just want to start selling charcoal to put on people's barbecues, and Scope3 is a terrible idea, the company just couldn't exist anymore. We couldn't do that pivot because of that. So I think what being a public benefit corporation does is it means that we have that almost enforced underlying level of integrity at the company.
Yeah.
Where, if our mission is to decarbonize media and advertising, our mission is really to decarbonize media and advertising. That is core to who we are, core to how we make decisions. So if 3 steps down the line, a decision that we've made in how we build our product or how we help our clients could inadvertently lead it backwards, that's going to help us in our decision-making process. The other title qualification that's very similar, or thought of it in a similar way to PBC, is B Corp, which is another certification that companies go through to essentially have a very high bar on the E, the S, and the G of a company from when it's founded. And we've kicked off that process. You can't actually even start it in the first year of existence. A lot of it is about making sure that you're a place to work that is of the highest level from a moral, ethical position. The same with the way that the clients that you work with. And B Corp are actually currently changing from needing a minimum threshold of points to meeting criteria in like every single one of their categories. So that is definitely a big, important process, and one where it's quite nice to see that as we founded the company and we thought about important things like how we roll out parental leave to all of our employees and how we should pay people. It's like ticking the boxes already in what it will mean to be a B Corp. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do to make sure that we have all of the processes and the proof points in place for us as a company.
And you talk about decisions you make today having implications, being thoughtful about the implications years from now. It makes me think about something you said earlier, that day one you were trying to figure out what's the right cloud service to use, because that matters in the context of your mission and the product and service you're delivering. So I'm curious how you think about growth and how you plan for growth. And obviously, as you grow as a company and as a service and as a team, the direct implications on your emissions and footprint are inherently going to increase. And so how do you think about growth and doing growth sustainably and serving more people, providing more to the world, but doing it in a way that also, is true to that vision? It's an interesting little paradox, right?
Yes. And it's a really great question that we talk about a lot internally. The shorthand at Scope3 is walking the walk. So how do we make sure that, if we're reducing metric tons a month in the ad tech ecosystem, but we're adding 10x that as a company, which is not the case, but if we were, that's not probably really getting to the point, which is actually we're trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere or stopping it going into the atmosphere in the first place. So a couple of ways that we frame that discussion. The first one is that we try and make sure that we're factoring in data and knowledge about the emissions impact in decision making. It's not an afterthought. So should we meet in person as a whole company? We're fully remote. We have people on the West Coast in mountain time, on the East Coast. We've got people in Canada, in the UK, in Germany, in France, Brazil, Australia, Uzbekistan, India. Like we've got people everywhere.
Right.
So if we're fully remote, we don't have office space, people work from home, how do we have that collaboration that I talked about at the beginning? How do we make sure that when we convene, it justifies the carbon? And how often do we convene? So I think even just having that as one of the core criteria of making decisions is really, really important. And it means that some decisions, like, I talked about the cloud platform, the engineering team did a project towards the end of last year where they did a lot of refactoring and thought a lot about performance, but actually with a primary goal of making sure that our energy consumption would significantly go down.
Yeah.
So we actually doubled our capacity for customers. We actually halved our emissions at the same time because we were thinking about the problem and thinking about ways of making it better. So again, this is another one where I don't have a spreadsheet that's like, okay, business value is 80 out of 100 and emissions is X metric tons. Therefore, it's below that. And we have this complex calculation and therefore like it's a go or no go. But we have these continuous collaborative discussions to make sure that we're including that.
It's in the calculations.
It's in the discussion and in the qualitative calculations for sure.
I mean, one other thing I want to dive into real quick is it's awesome and interesting. And I've seen this more and more that Scope3, much of your modeling and your research methodology is open source.
Yes.
Which actually harkens back to, the earliest of theorems where people pass it back and forth and are, like you mentioned earlier, mathematicians are fixing and correcting and editing. And it's something that we've seen, I think, a lot more in impact companies, from Allbirds doing it with the technology around its materials, material sciences company doing it a lot. And I think it's a really impressive approach. So I'm curious why that was a part of the decision-making and what you've noticed about that decision for your own company, for your clients, and for the industry in general.
Yeah, again, I think it was a collaborative decision at the company because we wanted to make sure that we would be able to continue to learn and to know how to make our methodology better. So within the AdTech ecosystem, when we started the company, there was no full methodology in a granular, deep way that was doing this. And so we, would share Word doc files with clients. We'd send a 2-page, this is our methodology for calculating the emissions across the supply chain. It would be a 2-page Word document. And then our client or potential client, we weren't even working together officially at that point, would send us a 4-page summary back of all his thoughts and scientific papers that we should look at that we'd missed, and understanding how we should pull in embodied emissions into how we think about the phone device use, and all of this stuff. So we realized that the open sourcing would be not only beneficial for hopefully everyone else as a learning about, okay, this is actually what it takes, what you need from a scientific and expertise perspective to be accurate in the model, but also please tell me if we've made a mistake or someone's just published something that updates all of these numbers that we've been using, or this calculation is slightly wrong. We've got it all there, fully open source. So we've got contributors, but we also get a lot of feedback. And that's primarily why we need to be doing this. There is a process at the moment to align an industry standard across everything. And again, we've been heavily contributing to that, making sure that we are helping the ecosystem as well to set the bar really high. Because ultimately, while we can have advertising metrics that only advertisers care about, fundamentally what we're doing here, even if it's just calculations on paper, the outcome of that is whether or not the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going down or not. Like, we could lie to ourselves and just have something really simple and say, yeah, we're good. But I mean, we have to have a bar that's set high, because if people are making decisions against this data, it needs to have that like level of truth. So the true, false, not true kind of scenario.
Yeah. As you think about kind of what's next, the future that we are building for the next generation, and from the space you sit in every day, whether it's looking at burgeoning technology and thinking about how we can do better as an industry, or as both the media sector, the digital ad sector, the ad tech sector, publishers, like all the, there's so many people, organizations aligned in this. Are you fundamentally optimistic about where we're going?
That's a tricky question. I think the thing that actually just got stuck on was that you said for the next generation. And I think based on what the climate scientists tell us, it's our generation. Like, what are we doing for us now?
Sure.
I consider myself young. I'm pretty young. I'm not Gen Z though, so I'm not that young. But, in 50 years' time, I'm going to be an old woman, and I'm going to be really experiencing the impact of whatever point we manage to collectively reach as a human race in 2030. Like, it's going to be me.
Yeah.
And so I would always reframe that question to be, what are we doing for our selfish selves? Because actually, I think that makes people, they could freeze, but it can make people be a little bit more aware of where we're at, where we're headed, and what it means for me. Not just my children or my nieces and nephews or family members that are small now. And then whether or not I'm hopeful for the future, I've definitely just added a sense of urgency to this conversation. And I think what does make me hopeful is that there is this real sense of collaboration and needing to work together on this big topic. Someone messaged me on LinkedIn the other day saying, I'd love to connect because we are fighting the same fight from different angles. And I love that. But I think the other thing that gives me hope is that we see at Scope3 that businesses who are leaning in to wanting to reduce their emissions and to wanting to talk about that and, be good partners within the ecosystem in this complex supply chain are seeing the economic benefits of doing so. And so actually it's not, should I do sustainability and slowly run my business into the ground, or should I ignore it? There is a path. It might not be the easiest path, and it might not be the status quo that you've been used to doing for the last 10, 20, 50 years as a business. But that also gives me hope that, as fundamentally selfish beings in many ways, from a preservation perspective, although we have a big blind spot about the climate crisis, we can actually be marrying our interest in doing good business with our interest in doing good for the planet.
Well, what gives me hope is actually somewhat in how I frame the question, which is, you didn't have to think twice about starting this business. There were so many potential and likely buyers for your services. And like I just said, they're media companies, they're publishers, they're ad tech companies. There's a demand to figure this out, and that's helping you guys build an entire company around it. So I am fortunate. I talk to entrepreneurs every day who are building businesses in service of this solution. I guess, when you close your eyes and think about that future as an old woman, as you say, what do you think a successful, sustainable future looks like if we all do keep moving in the right direction?
I don't have a great definition of what sustainable growth looks like, but I do think that there is a responsibility on companies to think beyond profit at all costs and think more about how they can be part of a more sustainable future that we live in. Just thinking about the amount of stuff that we all have, the things that we want to do, the goals that we all want to achieve. Like, if everyone did all of those things all at once, we're definitely not going to hit our goals. But I think having structures and frameworks in place to be comfortable and happy and content living within certain, boxes is how I see the sustainable kind of growth being possible for that more sustainable future.
Let's wrap up with where folks can learn more about Scope3 and connect with the company, connect with you online? Anything that, talks or events or places you want to send folks in the digital realm to learn more?
Yeah. So on our website, scope3.com, we've actually gone beyond just open sourcing our methodology, where you can read exactly how we do this. And we've opened up our data set. So you can get free insights. You can look up 5 properties. So, your favorite or least favorite social platform, publisher website, gaming app, you name it, it's there. You can do 5 completely free. We don't know who you are or anything. And if you want to keep searching to see overall insights, who's good and who's bad, you can create a free account, keep going. And that's kind of our way of showcasing to the advertising ecosystem, the way of quantifying and even understanding what the problem is. And anyone can do that. We have some people from universities browsing around in there, looking and understanding the actual impact of the advertising ecosystem and probably making some decisions around that too.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. I would like to invite, we can put your thesis in the show notes too. I'd be curious to read it.
Oh, gosh.
Sounds fun.
There's actually really good pictures in it. I think I looked at the different multiplication methods across all the different countries of the world and how it's taught and how some of them feel more like proofs and some of them feel more like experiments. There's great stuff in there.
I love it. Thanks so much for taking the time today. It was such an awesome conversation.
Thanks, Conor.
Big thanks to Anne Coghlan for joining us on Consensus in Conversation this week. You can find out more about Scope3 on their website, scope3.com, and we'll have all the links for you to connect with their socials in the show notes. Speaking of show notes, check out the episode on Spotify for a brand new Q&A this week. It's been really fun seeing everyone's answers, so make sure you go and weigh in. As always, you can email us at cic@consensus-digital.com. That's cic@consensus-digital.com. You can also message me directly on LinkedIn and Threads at @CKGaughan. That's at CKGONE. Send us your questions, your comments, your ideas for future guests. We love getting your feedback. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a second to leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It's so helpful with growing our reach and adding new people to the conversation. And it helps us to continue bringing you more awesome talks with the business leaders you want to hear from. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back next week with a brand new conversation. Consensus in Conversation is hosted and executive produced by me, Conor Gaughan. The episode was produced by Will Gatchell and Jeff Rock with editing from the good folks at Reasonable Volume. Special thanks to the Consensus team, including creative director Kate Tucker, Greg Hergel on research, and Patrick Gallagher on strategy. Consensus in Conversation can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Consensus in Conversation is a podcast by Consensus Digital Media, produced in association with Reasonable Volume.